This is the End of the Road podcast with your host, Michael Coco. Exploring the horizons we never touch because we're already there.
Welcome, and thanks for listening. Tonight we're off to Chicago for the end of 2025 with the filmmaker, writer, and activist Charles Shaw. I guess I'm not so much into year-end reviews or wrapping things up into nice little packages or even New Year's resolutions. But what I am into, what Charles, I think, has found is a more profound sense of time and place that I thought was fitting.
To call it a consciousness shifting experience is, a gross understatement of it all. I went from, existing in a very kind of elite, insular, very particular, like super petty, like super immature type of world to like the most stark, hardcore reality of life in America, like right now, like the front lines of this war against these fascists in Washington. And it is so, experiencing more formal training modules, around trauma-informed care and going through the certification process for peer support, and hundreds of hours of, 2,000 hours on the job, hundreds of hours in like various, crisis, homeless shelters, the whole combined experience, has given me not only a profound sense of place and time, like now I understand why I was brought back here, now I understand. And not that my like purpose is anything grandiose. It's to be a link in this chain, like one net in this fabric here, in this very strong city that I grew up in, that I know every aspect of, because this city has always been a place where America has been defined over and over and over again, and it's happening again. And to be able to be here as a middle-aged man and to offer wisdom and to like be able to be out there helping people, it changes you. It just changes you. Like maybe I never went in 100% on the whole woke cocktail ideology until you're in the middle of it, and then you understand why every bit of it exists, and you're there to support that and understand that without that firewall between, them and people like, the Trump administration, there's no protection at all. Like, so, the first year, as I'm, making this huge life shift and working in a very different industry and, dealing with, 20 lives that change every day and, having to be, intertwined with the federal and state government with every aspect of their lives and all of this at the same time that we are, being subjected to this flooding of the zone strategy by, the Trump people, that they're going to throw everything at us at once to traumatize and destabilize us so they could do whatever, they could slip in whatever they want to do. And at first it was overwhelming, and I didn't think I was going to survive it. And there was very little I could do but just kind of watch it and just go through the emotional like upheaval. Every single trigger was just like destroying some aspect of my soul. And it was, it was really, really, really getting to the edge. And I made a really difficult decision only 6 months into my job to take a month leave of absence to go and, deal with all of it, because I wasn't sleeping. That was the primary issue, is I had insomnia because of everything that was going on and everything, the schedule I was on, and it was killing me. But I took a little bit of time to, at great risk, to, you know, rest and go under a doctor's care and treat it. And that ended up being the best decision. One of the best decisions I ever made, because I realized I just needed a rest. I just needed enough sleep to be able to regain like my sense of executive function, my sense of self control, and to treat the anxiety that was just eating me alive. And coming back from that, and having just a little bit of time to slip in there, just a little bit, so that I could process so much that had happened in the course of a year. Because I went into the hospital for the second time almost exactly a year after I went in previously, uh, almost the exact same time frame. So it was just the year of bookends of like entering as one person and then quite literally having so much of that person burnt off over the course of the year, and then reforming as another person, another version, a newer, maybe not necessarily newer, but a renewed, different version that had a different purpose and still had to continue letting go and shedding and healing and processing at the same time they're integrating new things. One of the things that happened, and I really don't know how it happened, but it just kind of happened all at once, was a spontaneous population on social media of humor, of comedy, of people finding ways to take this horrific happenings on a daily basis and pick it apart. And, do not be fooled. This is a coordinated, tried and true anti-fascist strategy, is to make them look absurd and turn the mirror back on them. But you watch this happening in real time with billions of people participating all at once and all having the access to content creation devices. And you've got this explosion of absolute brilliance. You can't even keep up with half of it. And at some point, I think when one is able to, and certainly I experienced this, it helps, and I should preface this by saying it helps to really understand history and understand the patterns of history, even though, it's, teleology is the art of predicting the future based on patterns of the past. And, it's pretty solid, even though teleological arguments are not, supposedly sound logically, the past does tend to repeat itself over and over again. And everybody who understands that has an opportunity to essentially accept that and make peace with it. Okay. They can say, okay, I'm going to continue to fight this on an unconscious nervous system level. I'm going to continue to resist, or I'm going to accept and then adjust. And I felt like I was accepting and adjusting. I decided I can't help but be part of the resistance, but I'm not qualified to be this type of resistance person. I used to be that kind of person. I'm too old for that. What can I do? How can I contribute? How can I be a part of this? Well, I'm going to start using clever analysis, truth, and comedy and humor as much as possible. And try to, okay, if the idea is that entertainment works, then Jesus, let's entertain people at the same time that we are educating them. And, the only difference is it's not passive, it's active. So people have to want to do what you do and actually sit and experience it. Most attention spans aren't there, so too many little dots at the top, and people automatically jump through it because they just don't even want to think about having to sit and commit to all of that. And it's, a little dance, but if you can plant a seed with one person, well, that's the thing about these social media networks, is they are networks, and one person, suddenly everyone they know is picking up on the same idea too. It's slower, it's not immediate, but you've seen the results. People were paralyzed 6 months ago, let alone a year ago. in shock, traumatic shock. They didn't know what to do. We didn't know what to do. A year later, we're looking at a very different picture. We're looking at a desperate bunch of people that have fucked up so epically awful, so dramatically shitty. Like, you cannot, a team of the world's greatest comedy writers could not come up with this stuff that these people are giving us, this material. And we have literally the Mad King coming apart at the seams, you know? At the same time, there are all of these same things that should make any thinking, feeling person sick, you know? Watching that there is still a significant chunk of this country that no matter what these clowns do, they're going to be behind it. You know, that's really disturbing.
Do you remember that old Charlie Chaplin film that was parodying Hitler?
Yes.
And the past, and
what was it called?
Great Dictator.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I was when you were describing that. I had that going through my mind, and then I was thinking the difference between, like, in the past, there weren't reels, they were films. You know, you had to, the propaganda was, in a movie theater, and then later it was kind of on the television set, and now it's on your phone, the propaganda, and it's kind of been, each time movie, 2 hours, hour and a half. TV, half an hour, and now it's like 2 minutes.
Yeah.
The time period and the it just gets right to the punch. But you lose, I think, and this is what I think balances your Instagram feed. You lose sort of the cinematography of. There's something about the imaginal world that Charlie Chaplin created with The Great Dictator, and then you change that to, what's the Mel Brooks film? Mel Brooks had maybe that's another film, but like he had one on that was parodying fascism too. I remember in the 60s.
The Producers.
Yeah, The Producers, which I thought was brilliant. Yeah, but now but like in the reel, you can't get the cinematography and sort of the lush sort of environment that sucks you in more like those guys did. But in your Instagram reel, it's interesting that you've balanced it out. Again, you have like CinemaScope on your little reels always. You like your favorite movies that are. I don't know. I'm just trying to. It's interesting that you're still maybe longing for sort of the lush environments of, CinemaScope and theaters, but you can't do it because you just got a little screen. So you'll just kind of show it a little bit and it's there.
Yeah. I mean, as like a cinephile and as somebody who's, obsessed with the work of people like Kubrick or Paul Thomas Anderson, people that understand filmmaking on multiple levels and all that stuff. I mean, these are dying arts. This is there's been videos going around that have been showing how just the very art, the magic of cinema is all disappearing now because it's all been replaced with CGI, and the language of lenses and film stock is lost. So, people can use a computer program and a phone and shoot, a movie on it. And sure, it'll look gorgeous, but none of it will reflect, what the eye actually sees. And the old films, what they did have was, depth of field in the photography. So you saw everything in the frame because everything in the frame was part of the story. Well, we can't do that anymore. We don't have the attention span to study things in detail. So the imagery that we're seeing now is being broken down into just a few dominant colors per shot. So you have beautiful cinematography and lighting, but it's all very stylized. And you'll have, traditional photography of like rule of thirds, but you'll have 3 colors in the entire shot because with only 3 colors to follow, the brain can follow the action more. So it's like the art is evolving to dumb down so that those who even have the patience to watch a movie anymore have to watch like The Avengers, which is just fucking idiocy. as opposed to looking at the mastery of something like Star Wars in 1977, or even something like Lawrence of Arabia, and the kind of the majesty of that type of cinematography. So David Lean, that old school stuff.
Is that why? So this fact that the cinematography has changed, like I can't even watch a movie these days. It's just like there's something about it that, I mean, I can watch something. I watched Nuremberg, but which is kind of chill. It's not, but like those action movies, I just can't. It just is like it's just like too much. It hurts.
Yeah.
And is that because, like you've said, they changed the color scheme so they're sort of unnatural, and it maybe
color schemes are unnatural. They have they have infinite coverage now is the way that you describe, meaning that they can set up as many cameras as they want, and then they just cut in between all of these different angles. But that is based on these arbitrary rules, like cutting every 3 seconds, for example. There are people that believe that that's a rule, and it's not. It's not a rule at all.
And it's probably not a natural
something not a natural rhythm
that your brain can resonate with, or
so people follow formulas, and they know how to make a pretty picture, but they don't understand the relevance that image has to all the rest of the images, and the scene that's and the perspective that's being shown. So using a prime lens to do a close-up on somebody's face and everything behind it is blurred out, well, that replicates being very close with somebody. But when you use that same lens for every shot in the film, including looking across the yard, and everything's blurry in the distance, well, that's not how the human eye sees things. So the human eye is recording the movie in a very different way. It's becoming more dreamlike and less realistic, despite the fact that the technology is making it so that we can create more realistic imagery. So it's a paradox. But I just think that the art itself is being lost for to the most extreme kind of late stage capitalist interests, right? And I mean, we could go on forever about that, but
so what about the art is you think is being lost that you're longing for, perhaps?
Storytelling.
I'm sorry?
Storytelling.
Okay, storytelling. Okay.
Historical context. All of that is, it's kind of a sidebar conversation, but one trend that I have been noticing lately that is very disturbing. I mean, really disturbing, particularly for, a spectrum person like myself, is the lack of understanding of history and historical details and context. And people that are putting out videos about history or aspects of history, or, a certain event in history, and the information will be wrong. They will not understand the context. You'll see like a, YouTube channel that's completely devoted to like analyzing film, but they won't have any understanding of the historical and social context in which the film was made, which, virtually all of the history of cinema has been contingent upon like what's going on in the world around it. What type of restrictions were placed on it, the censorship codes, the political situation, the new Hollywood directors revolution and how that related to the 60s counterculture. I mean, the 80s action films and how that related to the whole Reagan revolution and yada, 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 and corporate consolidation. All of these things play a role in cinema history, and all of the contexts, play a role in actual history. And all of these are being lost. Instead, what we're getting are AI videos, nostalgia videos, and they're kind of creepy, and they're kind of
yeah, I'll say
they're fucking creepy because you got a bunch of AI generated kids that all they do is smile when they talk, and like it's these very unnatural, overly enthusiastic expressions, and they're all taking you on this journey back to 2000 or to 1980 or to, when things were different and wasn't it great back then and blah, blah. And this is very dangerous shit, man. People might think, oh, this is harmless. What are you talking about? What's this guy fucking? No, this is exactly what fascism does. It rewrites history and it uses tools of mass communication in order to portray a version of history that never existed. So Hitler came to power hearkening the great glory period of the German Empire that never really existed.
Yeah.
And here comes Trump with his "Make America Great Again." And then now what's happening is that while there is this now no longer cloaked, right out in the open, J.D. Vance saying white people shouldn't be ashamed of being white, we have all of this overt racism, overt fascism. And what are young people seeing but these, very distorted videos that are trying to make you feel like everything was better back then, back when we had more racism and more police brutality and less mobility in society and all of these things.
Well, you've made films before, so let's assume that you're making a film now in the tradition of Chaplin and Mel Brooks. So how would you make it? I mean, or would you make a film, or would it be, something more condensed, or is it just what you're doing now, and you're just, that's not your gig, you're just out helping people?
Well, if we think about 80 to 100 years ago, the irony is that it seems by and large people were far more educated and literate back then than they are today. So if you made The Great Dictator today, nobody would get it, right? Nobody would understand it. There's something I saw today. Hold on, I gotta show you this. If I could find what do I do with my phone? I want to read something, but I have no idea what I did with my phone. But it was an analysis that somebody put on Blue Sky today, and it was saying, one of the reasons why MAGA hates late night comics and Hollywood and all these things is because they don't understand art, and that satire is taken literally, right? That people don't understand irony and satire. So they take it as fact and statements of belief rather than what they are intended as, which is, stating something, meaning the opposite and for, an intended purpose. And I think that satire and irony in general are lost arts. They were cornerstones of Generation X. They're kind of everything that we built our cultural capital around. Everything was somehow an ironic or satirical, representation of something else. That's how we talked. It's how we referenced things. And that art is gone. And the art of political satire is under direct assault right now by people that are quite literally too stupid to understand it and don't have enough historical context or understanding to put it in its proper place, right? And then you've got, a pathological, maniac like Trump, who's, narcissistic disorder makes him incapable of handling any type of criticism at all. And, you have people that are consistently getting this message that, political satire is bad, or it's an element of subversion. It's, and it is, it's not bad, but it is definitely an element of subversion. And so with that being under assault, I mean,
So you mentioned before teleological. You know what I'm saying. That what sort of phase is the next after Trump passes away and is no longer elected, and what's the next phase in sort of your vision if things go through cycles?
Well, I mean, unfortunately, the genie can't be put back in the bottle with this one. So our standing in the international community and our role, the role that we built over the entire post-war era, that's gone. We will never, ever regain that level of respect or control or influence. And, if you're one of those people that, and I certainly see enough evidence to definitely be curious, but if you believe that Trump is unduly influenced by Russia or quite possibly might be acting at their behest, as everything that he's been doing internationally seems to align with, you're looking at, a kind of factioning of the world order. If these guys if they get away with what they want, the world will be like three spheres of influence: one Russian, one Chinese, one American, right? Historically speaking and practically speaking, this is the period of decline at the end of the kind of traditional cycle that all empires go through. We're at that heavy decline state where
It's called in Jungian alchemy. I think it's called putrefactical, where it's like it starts to stink. We're in the Negredo, and but there's something. I mean, something can come out of that. I mean, something does come out of that. That's not necessarily. I mean, it came out with you in 2025. I mean, I think I should. It sounds like you had a change and some new blossom came out, and
well, I mean, let's just be like as mundane as we can about it, because I think that's the part that gets lost, is that what we're experiencing now is what happens when people that are devoid of empathy and compassion and love gain power, like absolute power. And say what you will about past administrations, or whatever about the government, there did seem to be a firewall between like the craziest and sickest of them all and like those people that were involved in the government. It just seemed like you had to kind of get a high bar of, performance.
Oh, I'm with you. I'm with you on that. No, I completely agree with what you're saying. In the deepest, darkest administration, there always was a semblance of continuity and humanity, perhaps, that I think this is different.
Yeah. And so, expressing love and empathy becomes a revolutionary act under these circumstances and in this context. And so, in the simplest sense, this is the way to fight back. And this is why the ICE raids were such a miserable failure in Chicago, because of the way that the community pulled together to protect one another and to harass these people to the point where they had to leave town. And in the wake of dozens of federal lawsuits that came down on top of them. And it was because everybody was out there taking care of each other, recording, filming, whistling, following, dogging, like whatever it took to protect people. My own particular journey has been one of, having to learn over many decades the consequences of coming from an extremely sick and abusive family, where like both of my parents had, narcissistic personality disorder, and my mother, would give Trump a run for her money as far as how she ended up. She's no longer with us anymore. But by the time she passed, she sounded no different than him. I mean, dementia does that to people. And my mother had dementia, and she also had untreated NPD, and she was, a very difficult human being. I'll just leave it at that. Okay. And the consequences of being raised by two parents with that type of pathology, you're stuck in the realm of personality disorder for most of your life, and it takes a while to really work through it. And, blessedly, I didn't have the same disorder as them, although there's plenty of people out there that have always wanted to accuse me of having that. But, it fundamentally boils down to, do you have empathy? Do you have an empathic center or not? Do you care? Do you love? Do you feel guilt, remorse, shame, all of these things, And so as my healing journey has been about, understanding the wound that took place to my empathy at a very young age, how that was a tried and true tactic of, the people that I was raised under, how that manifested as an adult, how, the damage that it caused as an adult, and then how you come to recognize it and move through it. And, is it a coincidence that it all kind of aligns up with like what the country's going through and what we're going through as a society? Is it possibly a metaphor for some of it? I think it is for some of us like you and me, Mike, because we represent let's call it the minority of like white males, and especially of our age group that took the path of consciousness, that took the path of, healing, that we didn't retreat into, the past and into fucking, toxic masculinity and all of that nonsense, Are we, indicative of, the society trying to heal itself? Sure. I think we're all playing that role, Um, but there's one thing that I forgot to mention when you're talking about everything that had happened over the last year and what catalyzed all of this. And I think there was also one very specific incident that happened, and it's a real hard one. But I lost a really good friend, a former producer of my documentaries, and somebody that I knew going back 25 years to when I was publishing an online magazine, and was one of my earliest editors. Her name was Tamara Spivey, and you can see her in the credits of like Plastic People, and she's her and her husband Ronnie Pontiac were two very close friends and collaborators.
They've both been on the podcast, by the way.
Oh, they have. Oh,
yeah. Okay. Oh, yeah. And I did a tribute to her. That's Tamara Lucid on the podcast. But yes, and yeah, it's just like secret. No, go ahead. I'm sorry to interrupt, but yeah. So wow. And well, she is. Yeah, I mean, that's one of my favorite podcast interviews we have. We were just cracking each other up the whole time. But anyway, yeah, I'm sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, go ahead. 2002.
Yeah,
and her and Ronnie were integral to Plastic People getting completed and getting Edward James Olmos involved, and we collaborated for a couple of decades together. We hadn't been as close in recent years. That the whole Plastic People experience was very, very difficult on all of us, and because we lost Chris and Kat Bava during the making of that film. They were killed in a car wreck, and then there was this whole fight with the estate of Chris Bava over the control of the film, and it was ugly, and Hollywood just makes people ugly, and because we had a Netflix deal, and all of a sudden that made people crazy, and my relationship with Tamara and Ronnie suffered as a result of like all of that happened, and I certainly wasn't my best self. And over the years, we, kind of started to patch things up, and, I was in more regular communication with them. And then I found out that she had died, and not just that she had died, but as I understand it, she was so traumatized by what was happening when Trump returned to power that she stopped eating. And she just essentially like wasted away to the point that she had severe cardiac damage, ended up in the ICU, and died shortly thereafter. And this was somebody that let the trauma of what was happening destroy her life, quite literally kill her. And I was terrified by how much I identified with that hopelessness, and how close to that I was in the first 6 months of this year. And it was so hard to see how devastated Ronnie was, because the two of them were inseparable, for almost all of their lives. And I said, the least that I owe her and the least I owe myself is to find a way to not let that happen. I'm not going to let these people take my life. They don't deserve it. These lunatics don't deserve my peace of mind. They don't deserve my health, physical, mental, or otherwise. And they sure as hell don't deserve my life. They don't. And, something about all of those factors together just was a blessing from God that pulled me out of something that could have very easily taken me in the same place. And I feel like I'm back, not back in the sense that like, okay, now you guys are going to be sorry. It's like, yeah, I'm done, man. I've done my thing. I've lived a absolutely fascinating life. I've been all over the place. I've lived, loved, learned. I've had tragedies. I've had devastating loss. I've had, unbelievable successes. And right now, I've got a much more low key life going on, helping the people that I feel need it most. And there's a tremendous pride and tremendous purpose in all of that. And in that, we suddenly get devoid of the need to try to control everything, or maybe that's age, or maybe that's maturity, or maybe that's wisdom, or I don't know. All I know is this shit ain't over. We got a long way to go. And it's a marathon. It's not a sprint. And whatever's going to come out of this, it's going to be change. And what the people in power and everyone that they represent fear most is that very change. And they can't accept that the time has come for this empire to change. Its time has come and gone, This is, I remember back in the Pinchbeck 2012 days when, running around in those circles and everyone was talking about 2012 is the age of revelation, And I used to laugh at those people, but, there was something to it. I don't know whether it was like Brezhnev or like Rushkoff or, Charles Eisenstein, one of those guys, one of those white guys in there started talking about, how it is the age where the veil will be lifted and all will be revealed. And I think that that's what we have now. And I think that that's what we have on our side is that, everything's there. What you're seeing is a bifurcation. And half the people are just living in denial and they're going to continually, force their version of reality harder and harder on the other people who are recognizing what's changing and are trying to go with it. So it's not over. And if we're going to get through this, we've all got to kind of step up a little bit and start playing our role and stop taking it so personally, It's hard not to, but this is just a process. And I guess the reason that I can accept it all is that I just see it as this is a process. Like humans have been around quite a while. We might not be around for much longer, but we've been doing this for, quite a while and, things change. And we just happen to come out of like, we were born at the, kind of the pinnacle of this whole experiment with this particular empire, and we need to listen to the ones that weren't born during the pinnacle, because they're the ones that see things as clearly for what they are. So for all of their lack of, historical context and understanding, I do appreciate the younger generations for their honesty with what they are seeing right in front of them. They aren't victims of the same level of self delusion as I see, so many of the older generations. So they kind of call it like it is. And some of it's ugly. And we shouldn't really like the reflection that we're getting. It should motivate us to do better.
Well, is this the time where I start to give you shit for getting me addicted to your Instagram feed this last year?
I'm as surprised as you are, Mike. I mean, if you were to understand that how reflexive and kind of unconscious that is, it's kind of like my only remaining social media, activity, because I kind of got off of, I got off Facebook years ago. I used to be, I don't know if you remember like my Facebook days, but they were ugly, because I think I really enjoyed the text-based medium that it kind of was in the beginning, where, people would make these very elaborate posts, and then there'd be like all of this, days of argument underneath it and stuff like that. And, in hindsight, like I was kind of one of those posters that I really can't stand these, like really, really can't. And, I mean, I've always looked at social media as a fascinating kind of template or little snapshot of, people's individual and collective mental health. I mean, it started to reveal things about ourselves that we, quite possibly weren't even aware of ourselves. And my Facebook days was a time when I was I had very little insight into my own behavior patterns and things like that. So I was like, quite craven attention seeker,
Yeah. So and it's almost, I think that we haven't quite discovered what's really going on with that. I mean, I kind of like, so you want to hear my reaction to your Instagram feed?
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, so like it's really fascinating, but it's just kind of overwhelming in a way. Cause like when I'm done with it, scrolling through like your 10 reels or whatever, I noticed that like probably if somebody had an EKG, my heart pressure or my blood pressure is probably elevated. I'm outside my body. I'm more in my mind, but in a way I've kind of gone somewhere that's sort of interesting in a way too. It's kind of like taking me out of my body into this space where you have all these, poignant and then pathetic, right next to each other, mixed up in this. And so there's just a lot there. But so I don't know. But then I'm thinking like, well, that it's going to be like we're going to be connected, all together through this someday. And then a part of me is like, no, I just want to return to silence. I just want to like, completely devoid myself of all this stuff.
Yeah.
But in a way, there's a connection there that I haven't quite navigated yet. I mean, I know there is a connection, but it's new and it's kind of uncomfortable, maybe. But I don't know.
I think that as the medium of social media has narrowed our actual kind of real life physical interactions, right? And we don't socialize like we used to and all of that. That need for connection and that need for, we are, primates. We are chattering primates. We need to like sit with each other and pick bugs off of each other's back and, scream and howl and fling poop. That's what we do. And if we can't like do it in real life, we're starting to try to find the places where we can. It's just, it's this fascinating process of everybody kind of, factioning off into these little bubbles, which, I think everybody would agree at this point has been very harmful to society as a whole, harmful to politics, harmful to, generational relations, everything you want to, mention in the same breath. And yet we're still doing it. You know I do it in a manner, because I'm trying to accomplish a number of different tasks at once. Like, I know there's a part of me that's wanting to like share information and inform people during a time of crisis when people need to be, more trusting of their information sources. And so I try to be a trustworthy source. I also know I'm trying to find people that understand my sense of humor and would connect to, the little things that not everybody's going to get. But if you're from our generation, or if if you've, grown up in the same area, or this, that. So all of it is really just efforts to try to connect on some level and to be seen and recognized, to have some kind of presence. Um, but, knowing that also, I've had people describe, and I've seen descriptions of the type of posting you're describing that I do as, being related to having like ADHD conditions, and like, having too many thought streams going through your mind at one point in time. I kind of attribute it to having a broad base of interests and wanting to like have an eclectic type of experience for people, because I, follow hundreds of different feeds, but one thing that is very common to most of them is that they are very, homogenous. Everyone's got their shtick and they're kind of doing their one thing. And it's got to be even more difficult for people who are on, camera personalities, which, I'm not, and I'm not interested in being, you know. Um, I think that's the main difference between like my old social media and new, is I let other people do the talk. I just like to curate and share stuff. But people become, you get overwhelmed with an account in a very short period of time because it's always the same thing, you know. So I will try to put the like pathetic next to the sublime, just because it forces you to go into different emotional states and different areas of the brain, to be pulled from one to the other. And I think it kind of creates, or at least tries to replicate, that much larger kind of holistic learning experience that at least I grew up with, in the traditional learning environment.
Yeah. So, what do you think? Back to your original point that it reveals something about us. Your this, how you interact with it. What what do you think it reveals about you? And because I was thinking about that and how to sort of I do mine. I'm not. Just to give you an example, I almost never have reels, and I just do like pictures, and then I have this like inhibition about posting too much stuff, almost like,
Mhm.
I almost like want to keep it like only one every couple of weeks, and not, not to, so it's just kind of interesting. That probably reveals that I'm sort of more that, restrained. There's a part of me that's like, no, don't do that. I have more of a something, and then
Yes, we
it's
call it executive function, and you probably
okay, well, whatever. Okay, yeah. Well, you call it executive function. Yeah, yeah. I call it. Yeah,
I mean,
I don't
but,
know.
in all seriousness, though, there isn't a huge component of impulsivity to it as well. And so much of that relates to the so-called neurodivergent or ADHD brain, or autistic spectrum, whatever it is, wherever you fit in that neurodivergent sphere. There is a kind of a impulsivity factor to it. Like, I can't help myself but to share, and I can't help but to consume as much as my brain will allow me to consume. I've had to, I've been in very unhealthy phases of it over time. I've been in healthier phases of it. I have to draw limits and boundaries with myself these days, but part of it is feeding this insatiable need for novel experience that my brain seeks out and always has as long as I've been alive. Now there's this engineered tool that'll feed it to you like an IV drip, and like an IV drip, it can either alleviate pain or it can cause like severe long-term addiction, And you have to be mindful of how many times you're popping that thing. And I don't think I am necessarily, I don't claim to know, but I know that, if you can't beat them, join them. So, you can tinker your algorithm to start feeding you different things. And I've learned over time to do that, to start letting go of topics and replacing them with newer topics. And I think that that's a metaphor, a symbol. It's like we're all showing each other how we're growing. It's what our social media reflects what our mind and our lives are engaging with at the time, even if it's orchestrated or contrived or only showing one layer of it. It's still it's still a document. It's a living document of like what we're going through. I've chosen to use my social media in recent years as not one of these, like, I'm going to become an on camera personality and open up every aspect of my life, reality TV life, but to show the different ideas, concepts, practices, journeys that I've gone through in what has been a long healing journey, of both healing my own mental health issues of my entire life, to learning how to serve others, to learning how to help others work through their things, and as a means of continuing to grow and heal myself. And then I've put select aspects of that out into the world, and anyone who knows me can follow along with it, and for people who don't, it would take them a while to pick up whatever continuities are in the content. But they don't necessarily need to do that, because I like to put, my photography up there and say, hey, look at this pretty picture. And, look at this one particular, particularly deep concept or quote or something. Or here's something that's relevant to today, or here's some people helping you process some difficult information. So I avoid like the feed function on Instagram. I use that rarely, because those are the things that people always see when they come there. And they're kind of like those thematic posts that, like, okay, these are, somebody has to scroll down my feed. This is what defines me. But your story is, something that is ephemeral. It's, temporary. It's what's going through your mind at the time. It's what you're looking at the time. And so I like the fact that they all disappear, that it doesn't feed the kind of hoarding instinct that many of us have as well.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Yeah, that makes sense. And it's interesting that I wouldn't. So do you think that you mentioned, like, before that, back in the Facebook days, that you sort of changed your relationship to it? I mean, since we're trying to make kind of a year in review, has your relationship with Instagram changed in 2025? And I actually went back and looked at what you were posting New Year's of 2024 a year ago, trying to get if there was a change on that. And I'm trying to think, for me, it's almost like um, I'm trying to explore, like, stillness and silence almost. And that's sort of like that's kind of new for me this year, that I didn't really have maybe as much. I mean, even though I, quote unquote, meditated in the past, this just seems like it's different.
Well, I don't think there's any discussion of, for many of us, our social media, and in particular, I know mine has existed, again, as like a reflection of what my life has looked like at the time. And a year ago, my life was in a very different place.
Well, you had just what I saw was like a post of Happy New Year, of sort of mushroom infused art with jellyfish, and then another one with Santa Claus, and what I'm sure was a Bufalabarius toad and a pipe, and now I look at it and it's like, that was kind of more, you were into these sort of ephemeral things, and now it's like, you're in the world, you're like, it's there's a heart to it now. It's not sort of this. I mean, I'm not poo-pooing the medicine culture, but there's
For
a lot of
sure.
it's a little more woo. This is like you're in. I mean, you've got reels of Chicago subways and comedians that are hilarious next to MAGA, next to ICE, next to these beautiful cinemascopes of what's the Pope, the film Pope, the guy that you always post that has these cinematography things.
Oh,
Yeah. I never saw that from you that I remember last year. I mean, this is like, I don't know. It just seems like it's not as, I don't know. You tell me. I'm just an outside observer, but that was my impression going through it.
you mentioned things like medicine culture and the transition and all that, and there was something very significant, I think, that played into all of that, and that was kind of after spending 8 consecutive years you know in the plant medicine environment as a practitioner or as a trainee, in Mexico in the clinical environment for years, traveling around by myself with my dog, going, and let's be honest, going to people who could afford to pay for, you know, psychedelic therapies for ibogaine, for bufo. This is a very, particular type of community, particular type of culture. And, I was at a crossroads where this burgeoning industry, and I use the word industry very specifically, as is bringing in an entirely different, younger, more profit and professional, like brand oriented generation, and people that are trying to commercialize every aspect of the psychedelic medicine culture, and people that are very covetous of other people's success, because let's be honest, like there was not that many people that were actually experienced practitioners. Certainly when I got started, I was the only person that was doing underground ibogaine treatments in the States, as far as I could tell, and I knew pretty much everybody in that world. There's one other person in Florida, but he had largely stopped working. Um, and that allowed me to have years of tremendous experience. But it was like direct one-on-one long-term experience, spending days with people, going through all kinds of extreme states, helping them work through all kinds of stuff, as a trained practitioner, but also essentially just a peer support, peer counselor, peer therapist, whatever you want to call it. It was wild. It was unregulated. It was, an amazing opportunity, but it was very solitary. And I was very detached from the goings on of the day to day world. I mean, even I didn't even really have a home. In the last 3 or 4 years that I was working steadily as a practitioner, I had so much work that I would literally go from one part of the country to another, from one client to another. I wouldn't even have time to, feasibly go back to a home. And then all of that ended when I took, time off, essentially because I went through a personal crisis, having gotten involved in a relationship that ended very badly, and was a very complicated situation that I don't necessarily want to spend like a lot of time on, except to talk about how it related to my understanding of mental health and my like commitment to mental health as my purpose in life and all of that, and as it directly relates to this kind of shift that you're talking about. But I was. I met somebody and got into a very, quick courtship in the late summer and fall of 2023. And this person was very interested in like learning about plant medicines, and was an herbalist herself and all this stuff. So we had a lot in common. But we got pregnant really quickly, like within 5 months of dating one another, and only a month after, like, we decided to move in together, and that really changed the dynamic. And this person was in her 40s, and I'm in my mid 50s, and there was so many aspects of you know um, hormones and, like, peripartum shifts and unresolved trauma and medicine work and all these things going on at the same time that my partner at the time, she became psychotic. She became, like, really unstable, and she became deeply paranoid. And over the course of 5 months, effectively destroyed, our relationship. And we had a 16-week-old baby that was on the way, and all of that ended, like, abruptly and traumatically in May of 2024. In a huge episode that ended up having ripple effects through my entire life. And it was devastating to lose my home, my 16-week-old son, like, my relationship, like, and a decent chunk of my professional reputation over my former partner's actions. And these things happen all the time. Like, this was unfortunately, not the first time that I had gone through a major life crisis, like the second time in 10 years, and I ended up, when I found out that my son was dead, and that in the manner in which it had been done, and also that in her delusional state, my former partner had reported me to the police as being a potential red flag shooter that was coming to, like, kill her and all. I mean, there's just all of this, like, drama that came into my life unexpectedly in the course of one person's breakdown and destruction of our relationship. It had such profound effects on me. It traumatized me so much that I ended up in the hospital for, like, almost a month in the summer of 2024. I had what is known as a stress diathesis psychotic break. And this is what happens to people under extreme stress, um, when the brain and the nervous system cannot handle the shock that the person has just gotten. So they dissociate into an entirely different reality. And that's what happened to me over a period of a few weeks in June of 2024. All of these things happened. I found out all of this stuff at once. I was, like, comfortably in Chicago finishing up Shadow People, like, our relationship had ended. It was traumatic. It was terrible. But I figured, okay, well, I still got a son on the way, and I got to go home and work, and I got to figure out how we're going to take care of this kid, and then all of a sudden, all of it was gone. And I thought that, there are people, the police were trying to kill me and my dog, while we were on our way back to Oregon. And oh, wow, it was really bad, Mike. I can't even tell you. It was the most terrifying thing that I've ever been through. I had never had a psychotic break like that. There have been speculations over the years that I've had doctors try to tell me I've had various, forms of bipolar disorder, but I've never really had any. I've never had any, like, traditional bipolar presentations. They're trying to come up with some kind of explanation for why I, like, lost my mind the way that I did. They didn't quite understand at first, and so I was at first, kind of told, well, this is what was happening. Over time, they were able to kind of figure it out with more detail, and as I was able to recount more and more of the story, they were able to understand that this is kind of what happened. It's lucky I came back out of it. It was later described to me this where oftentimes people will go into catatonic states for years at a time, or they will simply never return from the psychosis that they're in. I was lucky, but the net result of it was my life was shattered. when word got out that this had happened to me, obviously, like, I stopped working because, who's going to book me to come and work with them if I'm just getting out of the hospital and all this stuff. So, understandably, all of this happened. I'm from Chicago, and I've got, my friends and family and long-term, life support here. And so I made my way back here. And, at first it was without my dog because, they took my dog away when they put me in the hospital. And I had, that was like the single most devastating thing that had ever happened. And, I had to come back here to Chicago and try to deal with like all of it, and it was a very, very hard year. At the same time, I got to think about taking care of myself and what am I going to do and all this. And so I started applying for work in the public mental health sector because I got a lot of colleagues that are working in recovery and case management and, all of this type of stuff. And there's an enormous expansion of peer recovery support going on in the state of Illinois, and these amazing programs and all this stuff. And I got friends telling me, hey, this is the time and the place. And so now we're kind of getting to the shift point that you were talking about. But I've just kind of completed my first full year working in here in the city. So like I'm on the streets every day, like in the poorest and most marginalized communities, dealing with the people, that have the least and are, facing some of the biggest challenges. And working with a, caseload of over 20 people and, going through the whole process of, getting, certified as a mental health professional and like understanding Medicaid and like all of these programs, everything that's at the forefront of what's going on with the government and the cuts that they made this year and the $900 billion that's been pulled out and what that's going to look like at the same time that they decided to make Chicago the front lines for the deportation fight. So working with the Latino community and working at a crisis center in Cragen in the Mexican neighborhood, watching this stuff unfold right outside the door.